What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily, and in this video, we are checking out the new Vivo iQOO 13. Now, this phone is pretty special for a few reasons. Not only is it a top-tier flagship spec device with a pretty friendly price tag, it's also one of the first phones powered by the new Snapdragon 8 Elite processor. So we're going to get our first look at some performance numbers for that new chip, which should be an indication as to what's to come on many of the flagship Android devices for 2025. But before we get into all that, let's go ahead and just unbox this new phone. I didn't want to skip over this because there's actually some pretty exciting stuff that's included. Now, Vivo has had a partnership with BMW M Motorsport since around 2019, and we once again see that branding all over the box. Though the device I have here actually isn't the full-fledged BMW M edition of the iQOO 13. That special device has the full branding and M stripes, while the one I have here is the Nardo Gray colorway. As far as the included accessories, Vivo continues to provide you with all the essentials, including a clear, flexible case to protect your brand new phone, a nice BMW M Motorsport card insert and SIM ejector tool, and then the really exciting stuff, probably the biggest wall plug I've ever seen included with a smartphone. This is a 120 watt USB-C fast charger paired with an extra thick USB-C cable. And I love this. While plenty of other companies basically give you nothing nowadays, Vivo tosses in an insane super fast charger that coincides with a couple of this phone's standout features, namely its larger than average battery and quick charging capabilities. So with all those great accessories out of the way, here is the new iQOO 13 itself. As I mentioned, this one here is in Nardo Gray, and if you don't like this, there's a black and a green, and then that BMW M edition I mentioned earlier that you can choose from instead. And as far as pricing and availability, this phone first launched in China last month, and it just went on sale in India this week. My currency conversions might be a little off, but depending on the configuration, you should be able to pick this phone up for between $500 and $700 US. And considering everything this phone has to offer, which includes a Quad HD display, IP69 water and dust resistance, that new Snapdragon 8 Elite chip powered by an over 6,000 milliamp hour battery, and a crazy camera setup, I feel like that's a darn good price range. The specs and features on this phone are really just as good as Samsung's flagship S24 Ultra, for example, or the Pixel 9 Pro, or any other $1,000 flagship you can think of, and I think plenty of people will appreciate saving a few $100 by comparison. Now, if it wasn't already obvious, the iQOO 13 is a big phone. Its screen size is precisely 6.82 inches corner to corner, and you also get a really high 90% screen-to-body ratio. The black bezels are basically even all the way around, so the body of the phone is as slim as can be. And while it is still quite the handful, it's more comfortable to hold than you might think, since you have maximum screen and minimum bulk. Around back, obviously like a third of the rear of this phone is that camera setup. It's big, it's wide, but it's not as thick of a bump or a bulge. It doesn't really stick out all that much. So the phone as a whole remains fairly thin with a pretty consistent thickness. The back is all glass, the sides are an aluminum alloy, and like I mentioned earlier, it's also IP68 and IP69 dust and water resistant, so it's pretty tough too. Also, that camera setup has an LED light strip surrounding it that you can customize, which is an interesting add-on. As for the rest of the physical bits, nothing really on the left side. On the right, you'll find a set of volume buttons above the power button, of course. The top has a dedicated secondary loudspeaker that's just a little smaller than the main one at the bottom. There's also the USB-C port, and for the SIM card tray, well, it supports dual physical SIMs, but that's it. No micro SD card support here, which is honestly the only thing I think this phone is missing overall. You can choose between 256, 512 gigs, or 1 terabyte of onboard storage with 12 and 16 gigabyte RAM options as well. And unfortunately, there is quite a lot of pre-installed apps and other junky bloatware that you'll stumble upon, and you'll probably want to just go through and uninstall that to get back some of that space. The rear camera setup is a triple 50 megapixel deal that I'll talk more about in a minute. The selfie camera is a 32 megapixel shooter. This phone does have an ultrasonic fingerprint sensor under the display, which is great to see. Unlocking this phone is almost instantaneous and it's very consistent. And you can of course pair that with Face Unlock, which is also quite quick. You might have also noticed already that Vivo sticks on a screen protector for you, which I always appreciate. One less thing to deal with yourself. And here's what that clear case looks like on the phone if you were curious. Nothing really special, but again, it's just nice that all this stuff is included so you can keep your device nice and pretty from day one without having to seek out some extra accessories. Now, one of the top tier features on this iQOO 13 that I mentioned at the start is its display. And I want to make sure I hit everything here because spec for spec, this is easily on par or perhaps even better than any of the flagship phones. The 6.82-inch screen is an LTPO AMOLED. It can be set to a Quad HD 3168 by 1440p resolution. You can enable 144 Hz, and it has a peak brightness of some 4500 nits. Collectively, there's not much more you could ask for from a viewing experience than all of that. And I think the screen really is one of the top reasons to consider this phone overall. The fact that the screen is so big with such a high screen to body ratio already gives you an immersive viewing experience. And I think the LTPO panel really looks good, with bright, vibrant colors that really pop. There's a couple visual enhancements you can also take advantage of in settings to boost the color and contrast even further and ensure the smoothest visuals possible. But I think keeping things simple with just the Quad HD resolution and 144 Hz enabled is more than enough to deliver the best screen setup available. I mean, this phone has a PPI of around 510, which at this size is pretty crazy. It's as sharp of a display as you could possibly get, and visually, while the 144 Hz probably isn't necessary over 120, I think the fact that this phone offers that just goes to show that Vivo is all in on giving you the most possible. The display obviously meets or exceeds anything a flagship phone offers right now, but more than that, I think it's just an awesome value proposition when you consider the money you save. I mean, compare this screen to another $600 or $700 phone from Samsung like the FE that they try to sell, and really there's just no comparison at all. Also, one thing I fully appreciate, which I mentioned from time to time again, is a great set of speakers, and this phone has that. And they even support 24-bit high-res audio via Snapdragon sound. You get a standalone secondary speaker at the top and the larger main one at the bottom. And together, the out loud listening experience is loud, it's clear. It should honestly be the default setup for smartphones nowadays. We should just get great dual speaker setups with nearly full-size standalone hardware on all the smartphones. All right, so let's talk about what's powering this phone now, because I think that's what most people are interested in. Inside, the iQOO 13 is one of the first smartphones with the new Snapdragon 8 Elite processor. Compared to the 8 Gen 3, this chip is supposedly some 45% faster and smoother, with similar increases in efficiency, overall performance, and a bump up in overall power saving. Now, the iQOO 13 specifically also gets either 12 or 16 gigabytes of RAM, and for those of you waiting on Geekbench numbers, well, here you go. Take this with a grain of salt though. This phone also has an in-house Q2 CPU chip, some proprietary cooling, and it runs, well, either FunTouch 15 or Origin OS 5 if you're in China. So while you might be quick to compare this to the S24 Ultra or are maybe projecting what this phone can do versus next year's upcoming Android flagships with the same chip, it may not be a one-to-one comparison. Still, Still though, this phone overall is an absolute powerhouse. And while some folks are certainly never going to be utilizing all that potential, those of you who are, maybe gamers specifically, are probably chomping at the bit to try the new Snapdragon processor. Now, I'm going to do a comparison video probably in the next couple of days versus last year's 8 Gen 3, just to see what sort of initial speed and performance difference we might be getting. But I will say that this phone obviously feels fast and responsive, though I can't imagine the OS and simple app launching really gain anything from the new chip. Most of the performance increases are going to be found when you're hours into an intense gaming session, or if you're heavy into AI, or even utilizing the camera setup for some cinema quality filming or image capturing or editing. On top of the overall performance boost, I'm really curious to see if this phone in particular gains anything when it comes to overall longevity. I'll touch more on this in just a second, but this phone does have a bigger battery than most other flagship phones. So once again, it's not a direct comparison, but if the 8 Elite chip inside here really is maybe 20 to 40% more efficient, we could see this phone lasting potentially hours longer than most of the other $1,000 phones right now. Obviously, this is just my immediate first impressions and analysis, so there's still a lot to come as I continue to test this phone out, but I'm really interested to see if the new Snapdragon chip is the difference maker when it comes to some real world usage and performance. You guys know that I personally feel that most of the performance upgrades on smartphones nowadays aren't really experienced by the average user, but some things like efficiency and longevity and continued optimization under intense conditions, that stuff is way more valuable than a simple speed increase, and that's what I'll be looking for here. Also, like I alluded to a moment ago, this phone's 6,000 milliamp battery, or 6,150 milliamp if you buy it in India, is quite a bit larger than almost anything you'll find in other smartphones nowadays. Granted, this phone does seek out a lot of power, especially if you're running it at 144 Hz or the QHD resolution, but I think you're still probably going to outlast any other 5,000 milliamp hour flagship phone, for example. And if you do end up dying, that ginormous 120 watt power brick can get you from 0 to 100% in 30 minutes. So chances are you'll spend basically no time at all plugged in, no matter how much you use this phone. Last but not least, we have to talk about that camera setup. This phone actually gets all 3 lenses that I like to see on a high-end phone. There's a 50 megapixel main lens, a 50 megapixel telephoto lens with 2x optical zoom, and a 50 megapixel ultra wide. The selfie camera up front is a 32 megapixel lens, and inside the camera app, Vivo continues to offer a handful of shooting features that are actually not really found on a lot of other devices, like a full fisheye lens imitator, for example, an AI-enhanced supermoon picture mode, a stargazer and identifier, 8K video recording, a high megapixel photo mode. I do wish the zoom went a little bit further, especially since it has a telephoto lens. That's probably my only real gripe, and I don't personally find a ton of value in switching between the lenses, for example, but the first few sample shots I captured here really look good. There's plenty of AI adjustments that help this phone process the images, but aside from maybe a little extra smoothing, the phone definitely snaps a good, neutral-looking picture with a lot of detail, and I think the hardware and internal processing capabilities with the 8 Elite chip really do a lot in ensuring the camera setup is good rather than gimmicky. To me, the new Vivo iQOO 13 encompasses everything you'd want in a high-end flagship phone without having to pay a 4-figure price tag to get it. Some stuff like the display, the battery size and charging speeds, and the internal specs really go even beyond some of the top-tier smartphones on the market right now. And while the camera maybe isn't in the top 5 overall, everything else this phone offers seems well worth the price. And as a US customer, while I appreciate getting access to this phone and showcasing it for you guys, I know almost no one else here in the States will ever even know about this phone, let alone get it, which is a shame. But for everyone else in the world who can buy it and use it, I think you'll end up with one heck of a device. But what do you guys think about the new iQOO 13? Is this a phone you'd consider right now, or are you waiting for a different Snapdragon 8 Elite device to hit the market for 2025? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, of course. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video though. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.